Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with another Python Django tutorial for you. This time we've had a request from one of our subscribers to get a tutorial on how to use the Django form wizard. Now the Django form wizard is basically one of these things that you usually see on the internet when somebody wants to do something like a survey or a contact form or something like that, and they want to spread out the forms between pages and collect information a small piece at a time. Now this is really good for when you've got a large amount of information to collect, but you don't want the user to feel like they're just doing one huge massive big page full of information. You can split it up and have it happen over a few smaller pages and make the whole kind of information collecting process a little less painful for your users. So this is what the Django form wizard does. It's very easy to install. So I think what we'll do is we'll just get stuck in, and we'll start with the configuration settings just to get it set up so that we can then code some ways of using it. And I'm going to use the example of a contact form this time round, because I couldn't think of a very nice kind of survey to do, so I'm not feeling that creative with it, so let's just stick with the contact form for the sake of just giving you something to work with and understand clearly. So the first thing we need to do is open our settings.py file for the project, and we're just going to add in the installed apps section the path or the module for the form wizard. And you'll find that that's in Django contrib form tools, and obviously there's a few other things in there that you might want to investigate if you get time. Just do a quick Google and you'll get to know what else is inside that module, but the one we're interested in is this form wizard. Now the form wizard, because it stores information across pages, uses the back-end systems. And there are two ways it can do that. It can either do it through the cookies or through the session. And we're going to use the session-based one. Now, if you want to use the cookie-based one, it's basically a matter of instancing or even extending the basic cookie-based version of the wizard. And as we proceed, you'll see how easy that is to just change that over. It's just a matter of just changing the actual class that you're trying to extend. So we've set up to include that module into the framework. The next thing is we want to make a few forms for our contact form. So in my normal forms file for the Django test main site project folder, I'm going to add in 3 forms, and they're going to be very simple ones just to demonstrate how you can actually link forms together using the wizard. So the first one is our contact form 1, and it contains a subject, and we've just said that it's going to be char field of length 100 characters. The next bit is contact form 2, and this is the sender, and it's going to be an email field. So when that gets submitted, if you put your name in, it's going to kick off and say no, you need to put a valid email address in there. You could make that a normal string if you wanted. I'm just basically demonstrating that you can use different fields within the forms. Now the next one is contact form 3. So you don't necessarily have to have special names for these contacts. So I've just added the number on the end for to just say which stage they should be displayed at. And this is just going to contain a message, which is a text area on the page when we render it in HTML. So that's that. Whoop, too far. So we've got these 3 forms that we've created using the Django framework. We need to now instance a class that can actually pull them together and use them or present them in a series across a few pages. So we've imported that into the forms. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a view that can use them. So over in our views file inside the Django test folder, we're going to first of all import one or two things just to set up for our view. The first thing we're going to import is the actual wizard itself. Now it's in Django Contrib Form Tools Wizard Views, and this one is our Session Wizard View. If you wanted to use something else, this would be Cookie Wizard View instead, but we're not going to use cookies for this case, although there's nothing wrong with that. We're just going to use it because that's what I prefer, to be honest. So we're going to import that Session Wizard View. The next thing we're going to do is import something that we haven't used in the series so far, so I wanted to use this to quickly demo how you can use the email systems. And from Django Core Mail, we're going to import Send Mail, which is just basically a function that allows us to be able to send an email very simply throughout the framework. So sending emails is a pretty important thing for websites to be able to do, so I thought I'd pop this in because it's such a small thing that it doesn't really deserve a tutorial of its own. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to also use our login that we covered in the last tutorial, and this will help us to understand what's inside of the returned results after the whole form collection, information collection process is completed. So once we've completed everything, we should get a lump of data sent back to our main handling function, and I want to be able to confirm that there's definitely information in there, so that's why I'm using the login, just to check. So with that, I'm going to go and right down at the bottom and just create myself a contact wizard, and it's derived from the Session Wizard view. Now if you've seen my tutorial on views, the initial views tutorial, we covered normal views, which are the kind where you just basically define a function and render the HTML, and we also covered class-based views. Now the Session Wizard is a class-based view, so unfortunately we're not going to be able to stick with that kind of convention of making views like we used in the past or throughout the series, but we can mix and match class-based views with normal views. So it's not going to break anything, it's just that we have to stick to the convention that the view wizard uses. So we're going to use this class-based view, and if you can't remember how that works, just whip back to the old tutorial and you can quickly brush up on that if you want to remind yourself. However, I'll just move on with this, and you'll probably pick it up as it go along. So the next thing we need to do is we're gonna set up the template for this class, because we're not going to use the standard built-in template because we want it to look the same as the rest of our website. So I've made a contact form.html, which I've got here, and we'll go through that in a second. The next thing we need to do is we need to define what happens once the wizard's finished or it's done collecting information. So we need to override the done function for this particular class. It takes a standard set of arguments, obviously self because it's a class, the form list, so a list of forms, and some keyword arguments just in case there's anything else needs to be added in extras. We're not going to be doing any keyword arguments in there, we're just going to pay attention to that form list and process that. So the next step is to process form data using a function that we're going to declare later on. We're just going to pass the form list instance in there, and it's going to do something with it that we'll later specify, and then pass us back the form data. And with that form data, we're going to put it into the done HTML page. So once we're done, we're going to say we're done, and here's some of the information that's inside the form data. So we'll print that out on the page, and and that's pretty much it. The next bit is we're going to declare this function that we're going to use here, and this is the bit that's going to actually do something with the information at the end of the process. So if for our particular situation, we're not going to store it in a database, although we could. We're going to just basically email it off to whoever you specify as the recipient of the contact email. And the way we're going to do that is we're first of all going to create a list with all the cleaned information from the forms. So everything that's been processed through and it's been taken through a process of cleaning out any potential threats like JavaScript injection or anything like that. It's all going to get dumped into there, and then I'm going to set up 3 login commands just so that I can have this the data that is inside of these 3 forms that should be returned. I'm going to have that printed out into my log file, and hopefully we should see something along the lines of this coming out. But that remains to be seen, because I may have managed to break things in the meantime since I last tested this, but hopefully I haven't. But let's carry on. So the next bit is to actually use the send mail function that we've imported. Now it's very simple. All you got to do is put the subject, the message, and the sender in there, and who you want to email it off to. So we've got four pieces of information. The final bit just here is fail silently equals false. This is just basically to say if this fails, then give us loads of output from the system, just to say there's been an error. Now you can turn that off if you want, but in development it's probably a good idea to have it on. So fail silently equals true means don't give us any output, just don't say anything, just pretend it never happened. In a production environment, that's probably well, it may or may not be a good idea, but you don't necessarily want that being printed out onto your web pages for your users to view. So you might want to push that off into a log file somewhere. So we've got our subject in the first part of the command, the message that we want that the person has entered in the process of filling in the forms on the wizard, and then what their email address is from the sender, and then finally the email address or a list of email addresses that we want to send this email to. And in my case, that's my email address there, so we're just going to push that off to me. Then finally we're just going to return that form data so that it goes from this function into that variable, so that we can use it in our render to response for the done HTML template. So we've created our wizard. We now need to set up a few more things, and we need to actually make this accessible through the URL system. So we need to open up our URLs function, and again there's a few more things to import. So the first thing we import is the forms that we set up inside of our forms.py. So from Django test, which is the name of our project, .forms, import the 3 contact forms. And the next thing is to now import from our views.py. Oops. So from Django test.views, import our contact wizard that we've just created here. Now with that, we're going to add in a new URL. It's going to be contact, and as with form class-based views, we use the asView method on that class, and we pass in a list of the 3 imported forms. So this is where we really define what forms are involved in there. So if you wanted 6 forms in there, you would stick all 6 of them in that list, and the view wizard, or the class, not the view, the contact wizard would know that you want 5 pages to do on the website, which is dead simple. So you're just basically saying, here's a load of forms, you do the rest of the work, you work out how many pages need to be done, you work out how to pass the information back to the back end, and in the end pass it all back to me in the done function. So it's very, very nifty and takes very little configuration whatsoever. So it's well worth having if you're doing anything like a survey or a contact form or something that requires you to split up your forms over a series of pages. So that's pretty much everything configured. Let's take a quick look at our templates that we're using, because we've got 2 templates that we're going to use. We're going to use the contact form template, which is the template that will be applied to each form as we go through the process. And then finally we're going to use the done template when we finally get to the end of the process and all the information's been sent away through our email system and logged into the debug log. So we've got 2 templates we need to deal with, and I think we'll go through the contact form the first because that's the most complicated. So what does it do? Well, first of all, it extends our base template, so it's going to look exactly the same as the rest of our website. We override the content block, and we're going to say contact us step, and then this section here, which is actually the way that you get the information about how many steps are available inside of the wizard, because the wizard actually passes in an instance of a variable called wizard, which contains various inner values. Now you have step 1, you could have step 0, and what step 0 would mean is that the numbering system would start from 0 through to however many steps there are minus 1. So that would be the way that computers index arrays, for instance. So it's 0. So if you have a list of 5 items, you start at index 0 right up to index 4 for an array, and that's the kind of number system that this would use. But seeing as we're humans, we want to use that. This one will start at value 1 and count up to the number of forms in the list. So it would start, in the case of us, it would start at 1 and count from 1 to 2 to 3. So in normal human indexing. And we're basically going to insert some more text. So we're going to say step something of, and then we're going to use the count variable. So this tells us how many steps the wizard actually has, and this will change depending on how many forms you put into that list in the URLs definition. We're going to output any field errors just in case there's any problems, like the validation failed and they put their first name in and they didn't put an email address in. That validation would show up here. Then we have a declaration of our form along with our CSRF token, just to make sure that it's secure as well. And that passes back to the contact URL that we defined. Then we have wizard management form. Now the Django documentation isn't really very forthcoming about what this actually does, but I'm pretty much guessing that it's just the main instance of the current form. And it also mentions that if you don't put this in, the whole wizard thing doesn't work. So whatever you do, don't forget to drop this in. I know it's not very easy to understand what it means, but just put it in there because that's something that this wizard depends on to make the whole passing information back and forward throughout different pages work. And the next bit we've got is if wizard form forms, So if there are multiple forms within this, so if you've got a multi-form form, if that makes any sense, then this will try to output that out of the page, or else this will happen, which is just a single instance of a form, and that will be put in there. Perhaps if you're not using multi-form forms, then you probably wouldn't need all of that, but you might, so I threw it in there just in case you needed an example of that. In the main, you're probably going to just use that one line there. The next thing we need to do is we need to check in the steps if there is a previous step. So if there is a previous step, then we're going to create a button that will basically cause us to step back if we need to. So say a user enters something in a page beforehand and then realizes, hang on a second, that's not quite right, I need to go back. Then they can use that button that we're defining here to step back. And we can also define a button that lets us step right back to the beginning of the whole step. So we've got our step to the previous step, but we've also got a step to the first step in the process, just to demonstrate how that would work. So these are just basically the values that would allow us to return. And then finally, we've got our submit button, which just lets us tell the wizard to move on to the next page. And then we close our form. And that's pretty much how it works on the contact form itself. A little bit more complicated than the ones I've presented to you before, but I wanted to be able to show you as much about the wizard's setup as I think is relevant and would be useful to most people. So we've added in a little bit more than the normal level of complication. Right, so that's the complicated part a bit over and done with. What we're going to do once we've finished all of this and we're using our done template. This is dead simple. We just basically override the base template and the content block, and we're just going to say thanks for contacting us. And you wouldn't normally do this in a production environment, but I'm just going to output the information inside the form data onto the actual page so that we can see what happens and what we're likely to see inside of there. So with all that done, just make sure I've saved all my files. I think I have. We're going to start the server, or restart the server in this case. Okay, and we've got page not found, so that's because we haven't actually run it yet. Right, so here's our contact form. Firstly, presents us with the subject, which we declared in this form. In the next form we should see a sender, and then in the next final form we should see a box to put in our message. So let's see what happens. So the first thing is I'm just going to put a subject, cheese, which is always a great subject, and then sender. This I'm going to put mike@me.com just for the sake of an email address, and the final step, a message. This is awesomeness. And then finally, just going to click submit. Now, this basically does all that processing that we've described in our view, and then displays the message, thanks for contacting us. But we output the information, and as you can see, we've got some dictionaries. One with the subject with the value of a Unicode string cheese. One dict with a value sender with the email address in, and the message in a Unicode string. This is awesomeness. So that seems to have worked. So if we check our logs though, what else did we see? Well, we saw that our login system has recorded what was inside of there, so we know that we're accessing the correct information inside of the structures that we were building in our views. So that's a nice way to debug the kind of information that we've got, because nested structures can be quite difficult to work with. So it's important that we can always be clearly checking what's inside of there, and in this case we've managed to do that successfully, so that's great. Another really great reason to have login switched on is because you can then check whether things actually really happened or not. And of course our email command has obviously sent off, or else it would have kicked off and said a massive big "this has broken" message, but it didn't, because we've told it to fail or not fail silently, and it's clearly worked, so that's great. Okay, so that's how to use the form wizards. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you had, please click the like button. If you want to know more about anything in this series, or get a notification when my next tutorial is out for the Django series, then please click the subscribe button, and thanks for watching.